Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you this morning. We appreciate you being here as we engage in this time of Bible study. We're studying in Luke. We're studying in the Gospel of Luke, and we are in chapter 19, ready to begin chapter 19. Luke 19 is where we pick up our reading this morning. This is the last week you have to put up with me in this class for a while anyway. Next week, Wayne is going to take over this class on Sunday morning. So if you have any complaints or grievances, be sure to air them this morning. Thanks for being here. We appreciate you very much. Luke 19, sort of a familiar episode, and our little kids sing a song about Zacchaeus. And so here's the story of Zacchaeus. Chapter 19, beginning verse 1. And Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans, and he was rich. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was little of stature. And he ran before and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. And he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he has gone to be guest with a man that is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. And Jesus said to him, This day is salvation come to this house, for as much as he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Okay, let's talk about Zacchaeus a minute. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. Now, this is his final approach to Jerusalem. This is Jesus going to Jerusalem, and the events that transpire there will lead to his crucifixion. But he's passing through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. And of course, there's this publican, a tax collector, Zacchaeus, chief among the publicans. And so he is a tax collector. He's high-ranking. He's regarded there as chief among the publicans. He wanted to see Jesus. He desired to know something about Jesus. Obviously, the fame of Jesus was widespread. People were talking. Everybody knew something about this Jesus. But you get the idea that maybe there were still certainly some questions in some people's minds at least. And Zacchaeus wanted to know more. He wanted to see Jesus who he was. I think that expression suggests the idea not just that I just want to get an eye shot of Jesus, but he wants to maybe see him to the extent of knowing more about him, getting knowledge or information about Jesus. Of course, the famous part of it is he was a little man, couldn't see over the crowd. You can almost imagine a short guy behind a crowd of people. Again, what this suggests to you is a lot of people were paying attention to Jesus. A crowd of people was waiting to get a look at Jesus, to be around Jesus. Now, he's not to Jerusalem yet. He's on his way to Jerusalem. And advanced knowledge of him coming and that he'd be passing on this certain route to go to Jerusalem, probably it was a well-traveled route, but people were aware of his schedule to the extent that they were assembling ahead of time to get a look at Jesus. Now, I think this theme has to be really emphasized as we move into the final episodes of Jesus' life. Jesus was immensely popular among the common people. I think that point cannot be forgotten. We're going to see here in a little bit as the reading goes on into his entry into Jerusalem that he was greeted into Jerusalem like a returning general from a victorious battle. He's immensely popular among the common people. Crowds of people assemble around him. And so the question then, within just days of Jesus being crucified, how could that public opinion change so rapidly? And the answer to that is it didn't. Jesus was popular among the common people right up to the end. And the reason he got crucified was because of the religious elites in Jerusalem who hated him, and they put him to death. And remember, when this account and the other gospel accounts get to the end of his life, they had Jesus on trial during the night, and they had him on the cross early in the morning before the crowds could even react to what had gone on. And so I think I don't think that anything transpired to change the popularity of Jesus among the common people. It was the Jewish elites in Jerusalem that hated him and had been trying to conspire for a reason to kill him for some time now. They're going to accomplish that here in a matter of days, but that had been their intention for a long time. The common people still were attracted to Jesus, and crowds drew around Jesus to see him, as we read in this account. So he climbs up into a sycamore tree to be able to see over the crowd, to see Jesus passing that way. I've always wondered, it doesn't say so, but you have to wonder if there wasn't something more than just natural occurrence. When Jesus looked up and saw him in the tree, he knew him by name. Did you notice that? He wasn't introduced to Zacchaeus. He looked up and saw him and said to him, called him by name, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. So you get the idea that there were some divine insights taking effect here, that this wasn't just, hey, there's a guy up in the tree. Hey, you up in the tree, what's your name? Come on down here, I'll talk to you. It wasn't that kind of thing. He knew his name and indicated, I have plans to be at your house today. So you got to believe that there was a little bit of more than natural events taking place there. So he came down and received him to his house, verse 6. When they saw it, that is, when some of the people in attendance saw it. And now here, by the way, this could have been any of the Jews. This wouldn't necessarily have been the Jewish elite who murmured, saying, this man has gone to be guest with a sinner. This would not have necessarily been limited to the religious elites that I was just talking about who complained. This could have been any of the Jews, because the Jews generally hated the publicans, the tax collectors. And we've talked plenty of times about why they despised the tax collectors, working for the Romans and overcharging in their taxation. And so the Jews in general, elites and common folks alike, had very little regard for publicans, the tax collectors. And so when they saw that Jesus, of this whole crowd of people that he might have chosen to be with, he chooses to go to this tax collector's house. Wow, that doesn't set very well. I'm not too keen on that. Wish he wouldn't do that. Zacchaeus now, I want to compare Zacchaeus to the rich man that we read about in chapter 18, the rich man and the publican in chapter 18. So Zacchaeus says, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. Now, how does that compare? Go back to chapter 18, verse 11, the Pharisee and the publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank thee that I'm not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. I fast twice in a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. When we read that, we said, this guy is an arrogant fella. Notice how he is bragging on himself in his prayer. And we put off on him for doing so, right? Is that exactly what Zacchaeus is doing here, or is there a difference?
Zacchaeus, he was publican. Of course, he was a tax collector, and they had a reputation of not being the honest people around. Even today, you have.
If you say IRS, I get a negative. Yeah.
But Zacchaeus, he was trying to explain to him that he was an honest person.
Okay.
He had a reputation of being.
I think that's right, Gordon, and I think that's the difference here. Back in chapter 18, the Pharisee was literally bragging on himself. Here, Zacchaeus is just defending himself because, verse 7, they murmured, saying he's gone to be a guest with a man that is a sinner. And Zacchaeus is responding to the criticism that he's hearing. Why is Jesus going to be with this sinner? And so Zacchaeus is saying, I'm trying to do the best I can. He's not. This is a different scenario, and I think a different motivation. What Zacchaeus said was not to sort of brag on himself or promote himself. He's just saying, Jesus, what they're saying, here's what I try to do. I hear what they're saying about me, but here's how I've tried to live my life. And so I don't think it is anything at all common or similar to the Pharisee back there in chapter 18. Now, we also used this case of Zacchaeus. Last week we snuck a look ahead to this account. Notice, he was rich. End of verse 2. He was chief among the publicans and he was rich. Now, the reason we mentioned this is back in chapter 18, when Jesus spoke to the rich young ruler, verse 22, he said, one thing thou lackest, sell all thou hast and distribute to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. And we talked at the time about this requirement of the rich man, sell all thou hast and distribute to the poor. And we talked about, would that be required of everybody? If you want to have treasure in heaven, must you sell everything you have and distribute to the poor? And we said no. That guy needed to because he loved his money, but not everybody needs to. And Zacchaeus, right in the immediate next chapter, Zacchaeus is a rich man. Jesus does not tell him, sell everything you have and distribute to the poor. So we get the idea that's not a general requirement of anybody who wants to go to heaven. It was necessary for the rich young ruler because he was too much in love with his money. Zacchaeus is not told to sell everything he has. Saw a hand here, Tom.
Even looking at the example of Ananias and Sapphira, they sold a piece of property. They had the option of doing what with it. They weren't required to give it all. They were, but they needed to be honest in what they were giving. Here, Zacchaeus, even at that, I think the New American Standard uses "I will," which is that first, future, that I will give poor, give to the poor, I will give half to the poor, and then he says, "I will." Even that, when he defrauded somebody, the Jewish law only required that you give twice, I believe, if you defrauded somebody. Here, he was going beyond that. He was giving 4 times. So he was going beyond what was really required of him, and he was doing it voluntarily. Jesus didn't have to prompt him about doing anything. He saw the need that he needed to change, and he went through and did it, and he told Jesus what he was going to do.
Yeah, I think you're right. I would argue that Zacchaeus is probably a fairly uncommon publican or tax collector, because the tax collector's general reputation was they were horribly dishonest, and they would really overinflate their tax bills, and they were very oppressive to the people. I would say Zacchaeus stands out as a strong exception to the way that publicans generally were. But he said, the half of my goods I give to the poor. That's pretty generous. I mean, you got to think about that. So he's a rich man. He says, I give half of what I get to the poor. That's very generous, right? And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, which the publicans often did, it. He says, if I do that, I restore him fourfold. So again, you got to say Zacchaeus, before even meeting Jesus, was pretty exemplary in regards to these matters. And Jesus, you got to believe that the statement of Jesus there in verse 9 is a commendation of him. He said to him, "This day has salvation come to this house, for as much as he also is a son of Abraham." So, Jesus acknowledged his situation and blessed him in this way. And Jesus said, by the way, at verse 10, in response to those who go back to the gripe, the murmur, verse 7, he has gone to be a guest with a man that is a sinner. I think verse 10 is Jesus responding to that. Jesus' response to that is, by the way, the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. That's my business. That's the business I'm in. That's why I'm here. So don't be surprised if you see me in some kind of contact with or associating with sinners. I came to seek and save that which was lost. Tom?
He also identifies Zacchaeus as a Jew. There he says, today salvation has come to this house because he too is a son of Abraham. So, and Jesus came preaching to, even when the church was established, he went to the Jews first and then on to the Gentiles. So he's not saying, he's saying, by this means salvation has come to this man as well. But he has to follow in the things that goes through. It was a conditional type thing for salvation to be brought forth. And a lot of Jews didn't realize that. They thought because they were a son of Abraham, they had their ticket punched and everything, which is fine, most of them. But the ones that Jesus was talking to realized that they needed to come and repent and turn away from the things that they were doing and move forward, same as we as Christians need to do as well.
Okay, all right. Any other thoughts here? Wayne?
One of the hallmarks of inspiration, I think, is found in these verses here. But it doesn't appear to be an overt mark. You can go to some places and say, oh yeah, that's obviously a reference that's designed to teach. But the Bible talks constantly about the warnings of being rich and trusting in riches. But yet when it talks about people, it talks about them being rich or being poor or whatever their financial state might be. It's kind of uncommon that a book that talks against riches would talk about rich people. But when you compare like we're doing here, 18 to 19, we can see that the riches is not what is being condemned. And it's obvious from the context, the riches is not what's being condemned, because if that were the case, Zacchaeus would have been condemned.
Yeah.
But the emphasis, and if you look at Zacchaeus and his, in verse 8, he uses that first person pronoun a lot there.
Yeah.
Not quite as much as
The Pharisee. Yeah.
but the emphasis is not upon self. The emphasis is upon, if I am defrauded anyway, then I will restore it to him. The emphasis is upon somebody else, somebody who's less off than he is. Whereas in 18, the emphasis was obviously upon self.
Yeah.
So to me, this is a hallmark of inspiration. You can see very clearly when people are discussed in the scriptures and their financial status is known, is given, that it's not real obvious, but he was rich.
Yeah, and their heart, and then we have to see the heart matter to understand.
And the Bible clearly shows the difference in the heart between those two. And that, to me, is a hallmark of inspiration.
Okay, I think it's a good point. To Wayne's point, if this was just written by men, uninspired men, you can't imagine that a Jew of the first century would have found any publican that would receive commendation. And yet Zacchaeus receives commendation. So what I'm saying is, again, I think it's sort of a subtle sign of inspiration like Wayne was suggesting, but if just men had written the Bible, if Luke was just an uninspired man writing a story, I don't think he would have included a commendation of a publican. And that's sort of a subtle hint of inspiration. Tom?
It also goes through and shows the preconceived idea of the people around. They classified all publicans as sinners. And it didn't matter whether, what their background was, whether they knew them personally or not. They put them in that category. A lot like sometimes, we look around and we look at people, they wouldn't be interested in the scriptures all just after they're saved.
So they had prejudged him just because he was a publican. Yeah, they didn't have details, but he's a publican. He's got to be bad.
It was like going back to the example of Job. His friends, made the assumption that he was a great sinner because all this stuff had come upon him. They looked at circumstances and situations and didn't look at anything else.
Yeah.
They made their classification there.
Okay.
And I think that's a teaching that Jesus is going through and trying to put out. You just don't judge somebody because they're a particular occupation or one other thing that they're not receptive to God.
Okay. All right. Let's read a little further, beginning at verse 11. And as they heard these things, he added and spake a parable, because he was nigh to Jerusalem, and because they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. Okay. Now, as we've been studying through Luke, I've pointed out several times that Luke really sets the context for what he's about to record. He really sets the context of why the next comments by Jesus are being made. And so verse 11 is sort of a key. Here's the situation. He's near to Jerusalem, and they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. So he's coming to Jerusalem, and he is aware that there's an anticipation that maybe he's going to restore David's throne in Jerusalem, that the kingdom of Israel would be reestablished, that they hated this Roman oppression, and they desired for national independence, and maybe this is all coming together now. Maybe this is going to happen. So Jesus was aware that they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. All right, so that's what he's going to tell a story now, a parable, if you will, to address that. Okay, so verse 12. He said, therefore, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. And he called his 10 servants and delivered them 10 pounds and said to them, occupy till I come. But his citizens hated him and sent a message after him, saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. And it came to pass that when he was returned, having received the kingdom, that he commanded these servants to be called to him, to whom he had given the money, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. Then came the first, saying, Lord, thy pound hath gained 10 pounds. And he said unto him, Well, thou good servant, because thou hast been faithful in a very little, have thou authority over 10 cities. And the second came, saying, Lord, thy pound hath gained 5 pounds. He said likewise to him, Be thou also over 5 cities. And another came, saying, Lord, behold, here is thy pound, which I have kept laid up in a napkin, for I feared thee, because thou art an austere man. Thou takest up what thou layest not down, and reapest that thou didst not sow. And he said to him, Out of thine own mouth will I judge thee, thou wicked servant. Thou knewest that I was an austere man, taking up what I laid not down, and reaping that I did not sow. Wherefore then gavest not thou my money to the bank, that at my coming I might have required mine own with usury? And he said to them that stood by, Take from him the pound, and give it to him that hath 10 pounds. And they said unto him, Lord, he hath 10 pounds. For I say to you that unto every one which hath shall be given, and from him that hath not, even that he hath shall be taken away from him. But those mine enemies which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. Okay, a little bit longer reading than we usually do, but it all fits together here, obviously. Maybe a real quick first, a real quick first observation. This sounds an awful lot like the parable of the talents, doesn't it? I mean, the language is extremely similar. This is not the same episode. This is not the same telling of the parable of the talents. In Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, the 5 talent, 2 talent, 1 talent man, is in Matthew 25. Jesus was already in Jerusalem when he told that. Remember chapter 24 of Matthew. He'd already entered Jerusalem, and he was at the temple, and he made the prediction. You see all this is going to be torn down, and then his disciples questioned him, and he went into a description of the impending destruction of Jerusalem. That was in chapter 24. In chapter 25, he's already obviously in Jerusalem. He's already been there in the temple talking about the destruction of the temple. He's not at Jerusalem yet. He's on his way. He's just passing through Jericho. In fact, we read down through verse 27. You might notice verse 28. When he had thus spoken, he went before, ascending up to Jerusalem. So he's still on his way to Jerusalem when this teaching takes place. So this is not the parallel to the parable of the talents. I mean, it's very similar language, very similar lesson here at the end of this reading, but it's not the same. It's not the same episode. So remember that the thought was, they thought, verse 11, that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. And so, in regards to the kingdom immediately appear, how's that going to work out? Well, he says, a nobleman called his 10 servants, verse 13, delivered to them 10 pounds, said unto them, occupy till I come. So this nobleman is going to go away and then come back to receive a kingdom. Who's the nobleman? Monty. Yeah, Jesus is this nobleman, right? Who has to go away and then come back to receive his kingdom. He's talking about himself there. So they thought he's on his way to Jerusalem. When he gets there, this kingdom business is going to be happening. And Jesus is basically saying, when I go, I've got to go away and come back and receive my kingdom. We know that they have all kinds of misconceptions about this kingdom business. They're looking for a physical, literal kingdom. Jesus' kingdom is a spiritual kingdom. They're all out of whack on their understanding of the kingdom business. But Jesus responds to them thinking the kingdom will immediately appear. His response to that is, I've got to go away and then return to receive my kingdom. I'm sure they didn't get that, but we understand, because we know the whole story. We understand how that would really fit the way it happened. So then he proceeds to expand upon this story of being the nobleman being away. He calls his servants, delivers to them his money, occupy till I come. But his citizens hated him, sent a message after him saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. All right. I think that's talking about his rejection, upcoming rejection in Jerusalem, right? That as we said earlier, the religious elites in Jerusalem are not going to have this. They're not going to have this man to reign over them. They don't understand the idea of the spiritual kingdom. But just in general, we're not going to have this guy. We don't want this man. He is not who we desire. We will not have this man to reign over us. All right, so when he comes back, verse 15, it came to pass that when he was returned, having received his kingdom. So he said, I got to go away, and when I come back, the kingdom will be established. So when the kingdom is established, then it enters into that business about the ones who had been entrusted with his money were called to give an accounting. And he commended those who had used what was assigned to them. They'd used it faithfully, and they are commended. And the one man who didn't, who hid his pound in a napkin, is condemned. Again, very similar teaching to the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. This is, as we said, a different telling, but it's, I think, the same point. That when the Lord returns in his kingdom, different ones will have been given different amounts of responsibility. We often talk about the parable of talents. The talents there are a measure of money, but it's kind of neat that the word talent it also means skill or ability or innate opportunities. Those who are given more are expected to do more. That's found here, accountability for our blessings and opportunities, that's here. I think that all fits. So I think we know that story so well, we don't have to go into great detail about it. I think it's the end of this passage at verse 27 is significant. Those mine enemies which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. I I think that you'd have to agree that that's maybe a prophetic statement with multiple applications. You know, you could say maybe here he is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. Maybe he's saying those who wouldn't receive me will be destroyed. And in the near term, the impending destruction of Jerusalem would certainly accomplish the punishment of those who had rejected Jesus. And then you could also say maybe it has the eternal perspective in mind, and it would apply there as well, that those who will not have Jesus reign over them will be punished. Any thoughts or comments on this section? Tom?
You know, when you think back about Kings, we had a series of studies here back last spring and talk about faith and the loyalty to a king. Here, Jesus is talking about that loyalty to the king. If you weren't a loyal subject to that king and pledged that you would die for him in that case, you were his enemy. And that's what Jesus is talking about.
Yeah.
These people that were opposing me, I can't have my kingdom continue to flourish, that they have to be, that loyalty has to be proven. And if it can't be proven, then they're going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
That is basically the concept of a king. A king can't live with treachery within his own kingdom. Otherwise, he's got to be concerned about being overthrown and disposed of, or any number of things. Other people rising to power. He's got to have that devoted loyalty.
Okay, all right, I think that's true. Anything else? We are if you want to put us into this story, we are the ones who've been given the most, right? Wouldn't you agree? That the most has been entrusted to us. Therefore, we are the most accountable for doing the best for the Lord. Monty?
I think if you look at this story, when we get down to the guy that didn't do anything with the money, that's what he's condemned for. I don't get the impression as I read this that if he'd have taken whatever part of that money was his to work with and made investments or whatever and lost it all, that he would have been in as much trouble as he was for just doing nothing.
Okay.
And so the lesson that I kind of take from that is that all of us in the kingdom don't necessarily have the same skills and abilities or opportunities to go out and teach others, but we can all do something. Even if we don't feel like we've made a gain, if we teach people and never convert anybody, at least we did something. In effect, we will possibly, you might say, lost the money. But this guy's condemned for not trying.
Not doing anything.
Not for being a failure, but for not trying.
Yeah, I think you're right. Tom?
What about the other side?
Well, we don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a story.
It's a story. It's terrible. But
Yeah.
it's interesting that he gives this to 10 people, but he only describes 3 scenarios
Yeah.
at the end. And
Yeah.
it's sort of like the most, the highest, the middle, and lowest. And it goes through, you sort of have to think, be a parable that the others did somewhere in between so they can think.
You'd have to think that, yeah. But again, it's a parable.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? All right. Let's keep reading here at verse 28. Verse 28, and when he had thus spoken, he went before, ascending up to Jerusalem. Now get the picture here. This is Jesus' last approach to the city of Jerusalem. He is going to be there now until he's crucified. It came to pass when he was come nigh to Bethphage and Bethany, at the mount which called the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples, saying, Go ye into the village over against you, in the which at your entering ye shall find a colt tied, whereon yet never man sat. Loose him and bring him hither. And if any man ask you, Why do you loose him? Thus shall ye say to him, Because the Lord hath need of him. And they that were sent went their way, and found even as he had said to them. And as they were loosing the colt, the owner thereof said unto them, Why loose ye the colt? And they said, The Lord hath need of him. And they brought him to Jesus, and they cast their garments upon the colt, and they set Jesus thereon. And as he went, they spread their clothes in the way. And when he was come nigh even to the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, Blessed be the King that cometh in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. And some of the Pharisees among the multitude said unto him, Master, rebuke thy disciples. And he answered and said to them, I tell you that if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out. Okay, so this is often referred to as Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem. And we mentioned earlier, extremely popular with the people at this juncture. Again, there's nothing hard to understand about any of that we just read. It's interesting to me that Jesus knew. Go over here to this little village, and in that village, you're going to find a colt tied. A young colt, never been ridden on before. Untie him and bring him to me. And if anybody asks you, just tell them the Lord has need of him. Well, they went and they found the colt. And sure enough, the owner of the colt, as you could reasonably imagine, the owner of the colt, hey, what are you doing there? Why are you taking my colt? And they said, the Lord has need of him. And amazingly, that seemed to completely satisfy the situation. How did Jesus know that would work out that way? Again, you have to believe that there was more than normal insight taking place here. That Jesus had some divine insight and awareness of how this was going to develop. I read an article years ago. I thought it made an interesting point. The Lord hath need of him. This is just a beast of burden. This is a beast of burden. It's a common beast of burden. The Lord hath need of him. The Lord can use him. And I remember this article from years ago. The author had said, if the Lord can use a donkey, he can surely use me, right? And that's not a bad way to look at it. The Lord has needs of lots of things. The Lord has needs of lots of people and their skills and their abilities and what they can do. And so, it may be straining at a point a little bit, but I think it's interesting to think, the Lord has need of him. That's kind of interesting. The Lord has need of me. What can I do? What are my abilities? What am I capable of? The Lord has need of me. If he has need of that donkey, he has need of me. And again, it happened just like Jesus predicted it was going to happen, and the owner sort of initially objected, but was satisfied. The Lord hath need of him. They brought him to Jesus. They cast their garments on the colt. They set Jesus thereon. And as he went, they spread their clothes in the way. Now, I think it's really important to understand how Jesus is being received into Jerusalem. He's not being received by a bunch of people who are saying, oh, there's that dirty scoundrel. I hope they get him. I hope that he gets what he got coming. That's not it at all, right? They're entirely positive. The common people are entirely positive upon his reception into Jerusalem. As I mentioned, this is what would have been done. So if you can imagine, so Jesus here is just on a donkey. This is a very common scene. But they're treating him like a general who would be riding before his victorious troops on maybe a white stallion, and he's all decked out in his military splendor, and he's coming back from a battle that he's just won, and the people receive him into the city, putting their garments on the ground. That was the way you received a victorious conquering general returning from battle. So that's really significant here, I think, if you can picture it. This scene is common. These are the common people. Jesus is coming in as a common man. But that idea of how he's being received is really significant. Luke doesn't mention it, but other accounts, gospel accounts, suggest that in addition to laying their garments in the way, they also cut down the fans of palm trees and thus Palm Sunday, the week before Easter Sunday is Palm Sunday, based upon them welcoming Jesus into the city, laying palm limbs in the road as he came. But again, that was the idea of a very positive, welcoming reception into the city. Tom?
Some of this prophesied in the Old Testament as well, mentioning that entering in on a donkey.
Yeah.
It seemed like that was there. So, in Jesus telling them to go get that, there's a lot of inferences on, how the individual knew to tie this donkey up and then why he didn't object to it things like that, we see where, you know, it's not told to us that an angel or somebody, you know, a vision of God appeared to the individual to tell him this thing, but it was all there to fulfill prophecy that was stated in the Old Testament as well.
Okay, I think you're right. Wade?
You made reference to this initially when you first started the study, but Jesus was very popular with people. And I mean, you can see that in his parables just by how many people came and saw him and listened to him. He was talking on a hill. People would just gather around him. Thousands of people would just gather around him just to listen. And so, in my picture of this scene here, I don't see 3 or 4 people out there throwing stuff down. I see lines and lines and lines and miles of people, you know, welcoming into the city. And the Romans knew it. The Jews knew it. And that's what they were so scared of, is because he was extremely popular. And the people, just like you said in this episode here, they welcomed him in not as some famous person. They welcomed him in as a conquering king.
Yeah.
They knew what he was.
Yeah. So, Wayne?
What's amazing to me in these passages is how would they know that he's king? Obviously from his teaching. He's been teaching, John the Baptist has been teaching since very early in his ministry that he is coming to establish a kingdom, that the kingdom of heaven is near. And he's been teaching this now for 3.5 years. His disciples don't seem to get it, but the people seem to get it. They understand. And the only way they would understand this is to compare Jesus' teaching with the prophecies that were in the Old Testament.
Okay.
And so it's obvious that Jesus made a great impact on the people with his teaching.
Yeah.
But those that were the closest to him, it was hidden from them.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? It seems so weird. I think you're right.
Greg, you know, a donkey is hard to train to ride. You know, they're small.
Especially one hadn't been ridden before.
They're small, and they don't like a heavy weight on them, and they just want to duck all the time. But this donkey, they do it.
Yeah, I had never thought about that, Gordon. I think you're right. Because it is pointed out, this donkey had never been ridden before. Yeah, I think that's interesting. The people who are receiving him, they praise, verse 37, they praised God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that he had done, saying, Blessed be the King that cometh in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. So, again, to Wayne's point earlier, notice, blessed be the King. The common people say he's the King that cometh in the name of the Lord. So, again, really, really popular, but we're just out of time. But notice, so here's all this popularity and the masses welcoming him in, but there's already negativity on the scene. Verse 38, some of the Pharisees from among the multitude said unto the master, Rebuke thy disciples. In other words, they didn't like what the throngs of people were saying. Tell them to be still. This is not appropriate. What they're doing here is not appropriate. You are not the king who's come in the name of the Lord. Rebuke your disciples. Verse 40, he answered and said unto them, I tell you that if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out. And in other words, this truth is so, what they're saying about me is so basically truthful, so fundamentally, necessarily truthful, that if they didn't acknowledge me, the stones would, as the one who comes in the name of the Lord. By the way, did you notice that Jesus, there's a couple of references. Verse 31, if the man with the donkey objects, tell him the Lord hath need of him. He identifies himself as Lord. And then when they refer to him as the King that comes in the name of the Lord, he doesn't rebuke them. He doesn't say, listen now, you guys calm that down. You're getting this way out of, I mean, this is not that. This is, you guys are overestimating the significance. He didn't correct them. He didn't hush them. He accepted that acknowledgement as Lord. And so again, I think there's a sign there that Jesus recognized what's going on and what's being said about him, and he doesn't object to what's being said about him. Clayton?
Just an example
coming to you, the just and have salvation, lowly, riding on a donkey, a colt, foal, donkey.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So it had been prophesied, and it's all, you know, we talk about the fact that Jesus, there's something in the 300 plus prophecies about Jesus in the Old Testament, and a lot of them are really, really significant in detail. Here's one little detail, just one little detail. When he enters in Jerusalem, he's going to come riding on a donkey. And surely that's not important, is it? It really is important, because if it hadn't happened that way, we'd have a failed prophecy. Then we got all kinds of issues. So that is significant. Zechariah, tell me the reference again. Zechariah 9:9. Okay. Tom?
Historically, as we look at this, coming up on, the Passover is fastly approaching, like maybe a week before this time frame. So the journey of Jesus comes down, along the western shore of the Jordan River, comes up by Jericho, which is a significant point. He's rising up. Now he's going up
the hills to
He's
Jerusalem.
going uphill. It's an uphill climb to get to Jerusalem. But as he's coming, the crowds are swelling into Jerusalem. This is the path that they would be taking.
Yeah.
So when Zacchaeus' story comes into play, he's in there. He hears this coming. He hears Jesus coming. He's coming with all these people. So there was a need for him to be up in the tree, and then going through a great way. Have you ever been any place where a president showed up? I think when I was in the 8th grade, and President Johnson came to Springfield, Illinois. Thousands of busloads of kids.
Just to see him pass by.
Just all over. You couldn't even get it. A few of our students got in and got up on the front line right there, and they stuck out their hand to shake hands with the president, and the Secret Service,
Slap it down.
slap him down. So it was just, getting close to somebody. And
That's a common thing.
It's a common thing.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.